Well, thank you all. I am here for just a few minutes just to really give a welcome and a thank you for joining in this nonprofit advocacy training, and thanking Vicky and Leah for leading this, and for Stephanie for all the work in getting this together. For some of you, what I'm going to say for the next couple of minutes is kind of redundant. And for some of you, it's a deep breath for a lot of work that's happened over the last 2 years. So literally about 2 years ago, the nonprofit committee under our chair at that point, Sherry Giordano Thompson, we had an idea that the nonprofit committee needed to really step up our game and be more of an advocate on behalf of the nonprofit sector in Miami-Dade County, talking to our elected leaders, knowing that there was going to be some change ahead, a new mayor, a new county commission, new state reps, new senators, all vital to the lifeblood of the nonprofit sector. And so we really started looking at how we could be better prepared to talk to them about the work that we do. And I don't mean mission work. We all get the mission's easy to talk about. We can talk storytelling about everything. Every single one of you've got a wonderful story that would be, capturing any heartstrings of any elected official. But it was more the economic impact. And that's really what we wanted to talk about. We realized we really had nothing to share that was current. And so we spent about 1.5 years working on an economic report that really talked about, from really 2019, the state of the nonprofit sector in Miami-Dade County. Very, very profound data, talking about the impact, the size of the sector, the economic impact, the buying power, all of those key indicators that, besides mission and storytelling, is, I think, a really key piece of what we need to make sure our elected leaders know. So we spent about 1.5 years getting that all together. COVID hit, kind of slowed our plans down a little bit, but we have, from that economic report and from some of the information I think Leah McDermott will share too, we've got a really great story to tell. And obviously COVID has hit a lot, impact a lot of nonprofits. So that'll be a piece of our story as well. So there's really kind of two pieces to this training. One is what you're going to be led through today by Leah and by Vicky, about how to do this, right? And why it's okay, and making sure everybody has a comfort level. You can see the goals here, what our goals are. But the key point that I want you to is, like, you just need to be comfortable doing this. And so this is the first piece. In an hour, we think you'll have a lot of information that you'll feel excited about, and hopefully maybe even want to pull some other people from your organization in to be part of this. The second part we're going to do in a week or two, we'll lock that date in, is really kind of give you the story. We've got a infographic that came out of the economic report, was maybe 32 pages. We've got a 2-page informatic, a really cool document that we can share with an elected leader. These are probably all going to happen virtually, my belief is. But part of what we'll be doing is giving you the kind of the talking points for what the informatic is that somebody would have in front of them on the other end. So, our thinking is probably 2, maybe 3 people with, one of our elected leaders. We're going to work with Vicky, particularly with her expertise, to identify who those elected leaders should be for us to kind of tell this story. And then we also want to integrate in there, or weave in there, kind of the chamber story, right? The chamber role in our community, and just make sure everybody understands that, hey, the work that we're doing as nonprofits, we're in the social sector, but we're small businesses, and we're, have an economic impact. We're, proud members of the chamber, and work closely with the chamber to do the work that we do. So I think, by the end of today, you're going to be ready and really, I think, excited about that next stage of getting trained on what the story is going to be. I think both Leah and Vicky have said, that second part is as important as the first part, because you've got to feel comfortable talking to the elected leaders. And I think maybe one of the things Vicky's going to talk about, if not, a little bit anyway, is like the strategy by how we're going to, we know who the elected leaders are. The thing is, we want to know, like, do you have a relationship with somebody? So if Debbie from, American Red Cross knows, Commissioner Diaz, we want her to be in front of him for the most part, unless there's a reason she doesn't want to be. because there's going to be a comfort level on his side or on the, Rebecca Sosa, whoever it might be, to say, hey, Debbie wants to reach me. I know her. I want to have that intro because, somebody I know is going to be there. So I think we got a great opportunity here. It's been something that the committee's been focused on, as I said, for over 2 years. And, we're going to do it. We're going to identify as many of the local elected leaders that we can to get in front of. And then we'll move on from there. So with that, I just wanted to say, again, thank you to all of you for your time. For some of you who don't know, I'm actually in a new job. Today is my first day in the office. I took a position with our great new county mayor, Daniela Levine Cava, as her director of civic and philanthropic partnerships. So, my portfolio is going to be working with the business community, the nonprofit sector, and our funding community, our philanthropic community to do good in Miami-Dade County, and with a mayor who totally understands, what it's like to be in the nonprofit sector. I think we've got a tremendous opportunity to really understand what you think is important in the community and understand how, we can all work together for the collective good of our community. So super excited about that and look forward to working with you all. So for some of you who don't know that, I'm surprised. I'm sorry to surprise you on that, but very excited. I started on Thursday last week, and today's my first day in the office. So I'm going to get back to my mask because this is not a mask-free zone. This is a fully masked zone. So, all right, all. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Uh-oh.
Thank you, Vicki and Leah. Take it from there.
All
Ciao.
right. Well, good morning, everyone. Vicki and I are going to kind of tag team this and go back and forth. Just a couple of housekeeping things. I know our group is relatively small, so we don't need to be overly formal about this, but please do feel free to use the chat for any questions that you have, or unmute yourself as we go along. I know I don't mind being interrupted. Vicki, I hope that's okay with you. Absolutely. Because we do want to make sure that this is as relevant and important to you as possible. And the way we do that is by as much interaction as we can. So thank you. And I will turn it over to Vicki to get us started.
Thank you, Leah. So for those of you who don't know me, I have been in the advocacy arena probably for over 30 years now. I'm a former elected local official on the west coast of Florida. I was a former county commissioner in the Fort Myers area and have had gubernatorial appointments and have been involved very much in the world of policy development, but also advocacy and advocacy training. So I'm also on the board of the Greater Miami Chamber of Commerce, directors. And so I feel very honored and privileged to share with you some information that hopefully will help you. I know some of you personally, so I'm really happy to see all of you here. Let's talk about advocacy. I think most of you are already engaged in some form of advocacy, right? For your own organizations. For our purposes, we engage in advocacy at every level of the chamber because we have goals, obviously. And we do have a committee called the Government Affairs Committee that actually listens to those goals of all the other committees. And that is how we actually develop our local, state, and federal advocacy agenda. So in this case, right, because, the nonprofit business sector is a very large component of our chamber. We want to raise the profile of this sector. It's usually a sector that's viewed separately from sort of all business, community conversations. And I have done, for the last 2 years, I have been trying to elevate this committee's work as really a very important business sector of our community. And so part of, our role really here, is in addition to your role as committee members or members who are cross-pollinating across some of the committees that we have at the chamber, is to really remind everyone that we're a very essential part of the business economy in Miami-Dade County. And I think that's an important point to make because a lot of times we're viewed as do-gooders. And really, we are much more than that. We are providing essential services that if they weren't being provided by the nonprofit sector would have to be provided by government. We also want to build relationships, right? A lot of times the people who have the relationships with the policymakers are the big companies, right? Like the AT&Ts, the FP&Ls, the Florida Blue, you name it, Baptist Health. What we're trying to do here is to ensure that we begin to cultivate those same kind of powerful relationships for the nonprofit sector. And that's gonna actually take us into not briefly in this training, but in the next training, we're going to really get into the nitty gritty about how we educate and build those relationships with elected officials. And we've listed a couple of them here. Remember that the mayors of our counties, we've got 36 different cities in Miami-Dade County. Some of them have strong mayors, some of them have acting mayors, but we also have 13 county commissioners, of which half of them are brand spanking new. Some have been in office elsewhere, such as the vice chairman, who was the mayor of the city of Miami Gardens, and former Senator Rene Garcia, who was a state senator. But for many of them, politics, local politics is going to be very different than where they have come from. So we're going to have a lot of opportunities to form new relationships with the new set of commissioners. And in 2 years, the rest of the commission will be completely new. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but it's a lot of great opportunities for us. We've got state representatives that are new. We have state senators that are new. And of course, we have a new mayor. So it's going to be critically important that the nonprofits business sector step up to the plate and become a powerful voice at the table with each one of those elected official segments. So if we'll go to the next slide. So, listen, I mean, this is somewhat of a, kind of a rhetorical slide, but it's one that I think is important. We have been doing advocacy since the very beginning of this country, right? I mean, this country was born on the premise of advocacy. And we've seen that a lot of our core rights to assemble and petition this government, as you will do now in an advocate role, has a rich history in what we do. And there's a wonderful quote there: Americans of all ages, all conditions, all dispositions constantly form associations, whether they be religious, moral, serious, futile, very general and very particular, immensely large and very minute. So we come in very different colors, flavors. I have been in the advocacy world for so long, and I'm always so impressed by how people gather together. And we're going to talk a little bit about that gathering of together when we talk about building coalitions further into this presentation. But these are some wonderful examples of how advocacy actually changed the world that we live in. So obviously the Emancipation Proclamation came out of the abolitionist societies. Farmers ensured that we had the Granger laws protecting farmers. For women, especially for myself and many of the female organizations, like Debbie and I belong to the junior leagues. The National American Women Suffrage Association was really, what brought forward the 19th Amendment, giving the women the right to vote. The Townsend clubs actually were, fundamental in the creation of the Social Security Act. And one can't even imagine a world without it. And then last but not least, in this example, one of the most amazing, Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act was really led by the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and all of their coalition members. So this isn't anything new that we're going to be doing. And we have, really a great history to reflect that what we do matters. So we'll go to the next slide. So why advocacy? And I think that now I'm going to turn this this sort of a kind of a segue into, because you got to do it. And I think people who haven't really recognized the necessity for it realize that they're not really actually doing their organizations a good service, right? It's legal, it's needed, and it's easy. And it really is. Some of you are really good at this, because I know some of you personally. So, this will be redundant for you, but for many, there's always been this notion of, oh, I'm a nonprofit, I can't advocate. You most certainly can, and actually you should. And it really is an important role. for any member of your staff to be advocating. And you're doing it now when you do your fundraising, right? You're presenting a picture of your organization, and you're having to convince, say, a prospective donor to engage, or a prospective member to engage. And so you're already doing it. What we hope to do is help you perfect your art, because it is an art. Trust me. And you'll see in our next training session, when we get into the nuances of advocacy and the political arena. But it helps your organization, right? You're going to meet your mission. You're going to create lasting and positive change. And honestly, I've always said a very good advocate is someone, many of you are on the ground. And so you inform policy. Policymakers you've got to figure out that they're at the 60,000 foot level, right? And they may think that they know what's best for everybody, but they don't. And it's been my experience over 30 years that the people that are in the trenches, the people in the front lines, are those that really are the reason why we have some pretty good policy. And when you haven't been at the table, I've seen a lot of bad policy implemented. So your organization not only will thrive, but you will help your community thrive. You're going to help your community by solving and avoiding problems. And remember that sometimes people think that advocacy is all about making something happen. I'm really good at seeing something that's bad and making sure it doesn't happen. So you're gonna see that advocacy plays a role on both sides of the fence, right? Because we've got some policymakers who really go off the reservation, and you've got to, rein them back. And if you can't rein them back, then we use our coalition building to ensure that what they're trying to do doesn't get done, because it's not in the best interest of the community and the people that we serve. And so you're gonna use your ability to give input, if you will, at all levels. And you'll see in this training a little bit, but really in the next training, you're going to see how your input really is going to make a big difference. So that's why we do advocacy. And I'm going to turn the screen over to Leah now, who's going to take you to the next slide and talk a little bit about the report and kind of like the history. What are we trying to share? So Leah?
Great, thank you, Vicki. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Leah McDermott. I'm the program manager for Florida Nonprofit Alliance, which is the statewide association for nonprofits in Florida. We serve all over Florida. Our office is in Jacksonville, but I'm here in Miami, and so have been getting a little bit more involved in the community, although I started with FNA January of last year, and then we all know what happened in March. So it hasn't really mattered as much that I've been here in Miami, but I do love it here, and happy to be becoming part of the community that's here. My background is all in nonprofit, mostly in capacity building. So in the world of not being an expert in any one mission, but helping organizations understand how to run their organizations in a way that allows them to meet their mission effectively and efficiently. And I've done that in lots of different ways. Right now, the main focus of Florida Nonprofit Alliance is advocacy and lobbying, and making sure that organizations understand why it's important, how to do it. And we also do lobbying in Tallahassee on behalf of nonprofits. We're part of the National Council of Nonprofits, which does lobbying in DC. So we do have representation at the state and federal level through our organization as well. And a big part of being an effective advocate is making sure that you have a clear message that resonates with the people that we've elected to serve us. And we hear different things from them. Some people really like that soft, tug at my heartstring stories. We all have those. We all know our mission work. We know that's important. And we're good at telling those stories. Some elected officials really like to hear, give me the dollars and cents, give me the black and white version of why you're important. And that's why this updated economic impact report that we have now for Miami-Dade County is so important. And I wanted to highlight some of the things that are probably going to resonate when we go and start talking with elected officials. This will make up the bulk of our messaging when we go in there. And especially at the beginning, as we start building these relationships with either new commissioners, new mayors that we don't know already, or strengthening relationships we have already, we want to make sure that we're sharing the good parts, the strengths that we have as a sector, and why we demand attention, why they should be investing in us in different ways, but also the challenges that come with being in the nonprofit sector, so that they know what those actions might look like that we could eventually ask them to get involved in as we go through. So the good, there's a lot of it. We know in Miami-Dade County, there's over 9,000 nonprofits that are doing work. As you all know, the nonprofit impact that we have is a driving force in improving living standards. So we know Miami-Dade County has a higher poverty rate than the rest of the state, most of the rest of the state. And the work that we do helps to make sure people are employed. It helps to make sure they are healthy. It helps to make sure their kids are being taken care of. It helps to make sure we have access to the arts and culture, which not only creates a thriving economy for tourism, but also helps reinforce the education that our children and youth need to have. So every aspect of our life is touched in some way by nonprofits, and making sure that elected officials who may be new to the sector understand that is really important. Our economic impact, $23 billion, and that's been growing consistently over the past few years. Even as the number of nonprofits decrease, the economic impact of the assets that we hold and the revenue we bring to the county continues to grow year after year. Our workforce, about 8% of the workforce, that is slightly higher than what we see at the state level, employing 115,000 people. That alone should give elected officials a pause there to say, wow, that's a lot of people in this community that are getting their living by working for nonprofits. And we need to make sure that they understand that continuing to invest in our work, either with dollars or with their support in other ways, is vitally important to making sure that families have what they need in order to be able to support themselves. So those are some of the strengths that we can see out of the economic impact report. There's lots and lots of details in there, and all good information to know, but sometimes having the highlights is the most important thing. What do we get their attention with? What do we draw them in with? And then what's the story that we tell after that? So some of the challenges that come out if you're reading through the report that might turn into that, so if an elected official says to you, well, what do you want me to do for you? These are the types of things that might become those asks eventually that we have of our elected officials. The first thing we all know is that COVID-19 had a tremendous impact on the sector. Almost all nonprofits, especially those in the human services realm, have greater demand than they did before. All nonprofits, regardless of what mission area they are in, have fewer resources than before. We know the numbers. We know nonprofits are very concerned about fundraising. We know people have less unrestricted income than they did in 2019. We know they've had less success in raising money than they did in 2019. And we'll show you some of those data points a little bit later too, if you're looking for the specifics behind it. We also know for our county, only about 25% of nonprofit revenue is coming from charitable gifts. That means you're raising it from individuals through the United Way, through your fundraising events, major gift campaign, all of those things. The rest of the money is either fees for service, you're earning it yourself through some sort of mission work that you're providing, or it's coming from government funding. And so that government investment, as Vicki said, if we don't do this work as our sector, government has to take it on. And we know it's much more expensive and a lot less effective for government to play that role. So their investment in nonprofits really makes sure to protect the quality of services and the affordability of the services that we provide. We know that the vast majority of nonprofits in our community are very small. So you can see there, 26% of nonprofits have revenues of more than $50,000 each year. We know that because that's the type of tax form they're filing with the IRS. So what does that leave? 73% of nonprofits are less than $50,000 a year. So the organizations that are looking for that investment is relatively small. However, the number of organizations that are looking for volunteer investment and looking for support for the programs they're providing is quite large, and almost, there's opportunities for anybody who would like to get involved in the volunteer role. We know that volunteering has also taken a hit as a result of COVID-19. So that is a nice way to maybe ease into working with elected officials who might be reluctant to consider funding or don't really understand the benefit. Having them support through volunteering role or encouraging volunteering in their districts is really important as well. And as I mentioned before, we know that the need is great here. About 19% of Miami-Dade residents have incomes below poverty level. That is higher than the state average and higher than many other areas in the state. So a lot of positive. We want to make sure they know the strength that we have, the power that we carry, the number of people that we employ, the assets that we hold, but also that we come with challenges, that being a part of this sector, by the nature of the work that we do, creates some challenges. And if they're looking for ways to get involved, we can give them some ideas for that.
Leah, I wanted to just add something real quick there, because one of the challenges the nonprofit business sector has to face as well is, so you know that some of you may or may not know, but our state legislature is very, very Republican, and many of our Republican legislators kind of don't feel very, I want to say, warm and fuzzy about nonprofits. It's something that nonprofits have a really difficult time. If you walk into a Democrat legislator's office, you're going to be incredibly well received, and he or she's going to be thinking about all these ways in which he or she wants to help you. On the Republican side, there's a lot of questions about why do we have 9,000, nonprofits in Miami? We think that they're duplicating efforts. We believe that, they're not very efficient. I mean, so we have to be, cognizant of the audience. And Leah said, the audience is so very important. And we'll talk more about it when we zero in on exactly who we're going to go see, because I know them very, very well. And I will be able to tell you what moves them and what doesn't, what irks them and what doesn't, right? Because, the way you message here is going to be important. And then I want you to know that we haven't seen the likes of these kind of deficits since 2008, when Speaker Dean Cannon was the Speaker of the House. And I can recall every nonprofit going to Speaker Cannon, and his only answer to everyone was no, you're not getting anything. And so we have to learn how to negotiate the no into I'll take crumbs, because there is a strategy around that, is staying relevant year to year, even when there are budget deficits. And so the beautiful part about our economic impact report is that we're speaking for all of us, right? Because I know that some of you are going to do your own advocacy for your own organization. And, I'm a real proponent of that. But at the chamber level, we're speaking for the entire sector, which I think is going to be very powerful because of the things that Leah has pointed out from the report. So I just wanted you to keep in mind that politics is playing behind the scenes as we're learning how to message.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you, Vicki. Yeah, one of my favorite phrases to describe advocacy is pragmatic optimism, because we do have to be very realistic about the situation we're coming into. At the state level, we have a trifecta, meaning a Republican governor, a Republican House, a Republican Senate. So, certain attitudes are going to be there and certain expectations. We're probably not going to be talking about raising any additional revenue at the state level in any way. That's not something that they're interested in entertaining. So we do need to find other ways to be relevant. So thank you very much. I'm just seeing Manny's question too about the drop off of nonprofits. It's a great one. His question was, is it from closing doors or from mergers and acquisitions? The big drop off that we saw around 2010, 2011 actually came from changes at the IRS level, where they actually got serious about removing 501(c)(3) status for people who are not filing their 990 tax forms on an annual basis. So there had always been that regulation, but they hadn't actually done much about it. They started to enforce that. And so you see a big drop off there, because organizations who had not filed for the past 3 years no longer were registered with the IRS. So that's the first big drop off that we saw. We do, of course, see every year nonprofits closing. We do see some acquisitions and mergers. We are expecting to see a little more of that come out of the results of the pandemic, although people seem to be slightly more optimistic now than they were in the middle of 2020 about being able to avoid that. But certainly merging and acquisitions is not always a bad thing either. Sometimes that's the right thing to do for your organization. So kind of a combination of a lot of those things. But even with the number of nonprofits shrinking, the amount of assets, the amount of revenue, and the amount of people that we serve has continued to go up. Okay, so let's look at some of the statewide data that might help emphasize some of these points and also give some context to where Miami-Dade fits into that. So when we look at the nonprofit impact for the state of Florida, it actually makes us the 17th largest economy in the world, and puts us on par and employment-wise with the construction industry in the state of Florida, which we know is booming. So at the statewide level, almost 95,000 nonprofits. We're employing almost 630,000 people, $333 billion in wages, and you can see there the revenue and assets that we hold for the state. So economic impact is huge at the county level. It's huge at the state level. It's important for people to know that messing with nonprofits, it's going to mess with people's livelihood, and it's going to mess with the success of the state at the economic perspective. So that's, once again, the good news. Here are where we struggle with some of the challenges, and this information might help you bust some of the myths that Vicki brought up, that people will say to you, there's too many nonprofits, everyone's doing the same thing. We actually have the data that proves that that's not necessarily true. So although we are the 8th highest in the nation for nonprofit revenue coming into our state, we don't fare so well in some of these other categories that we measure. 39th lowest in nation for nonprofit assets per capita. So while our overall number is big, when we look at by population, it actually isn't as strong as other states. 41st lowest for ranking revenue per capita, and 47th lowest for number of nonprofits per 1,000 residents. So the numbers might look huge, 95,000 in the state, 9,300 in the county. But when we look per population, by population, we actually are really under-resourced in the number of nonprofits that exist. So we don't see in Florida that argument that there's too many nonprofits, that we're all doing the same thing. Certainly there are people doing similar types of mission work, but there's also a little bit of an argument for our capitalist economy. If people can stay in business because there's a need for the mission and the way that they're providing it, who are we to say that they need to go away or merge? We wouldn't be saying that to the private sector necessarily. So we need to make sure that we're kind of establishing ourselves in that business world, using those business terms to make sure people really understand what they're asking of nonprofits and how we fit into that. And yes, we are the lowest right now in the nation for volunteerism. That's something that we are hoping to change. I think the number has gone slightly up, but it's certainly discouraging, especially considering we all know, our wonderful volunteers that we have at the local level. But on a state average, we do not fare as well. Part of that could be the fact that we do tend to be a little bit of a transient state. People are coming for seasons, or they're not from here, so they may not be engaging in the community in the same way as states that have, people that have grown up there and lived there for generations.
I've also seen, Leah, the sort of cultural diversity in our state. So Hispanics don't traditionally volunteer. It's interesting. They are much more involved in their church community. And so it's just not part of their culture in their countries to do so. And I've always been sort of, I have a lot of friends from Latin America, and I, always wonder, why aren't they involved in community work? And they're very involved in their church. So it sometimes can be cultural differences, because our community, particularly Miami-Dade County, is the crossroads, to the Americas. And so that may be triggering some of it. It's interesting that James asked, do we have these same numbers for the county? And I'm not aware of it, but we can certainly find out, James. Someone must have put this kind of information together, and we'll certainly check with Pat to see if those numbers are available, because it would be interesting to say, okay, these are the Florida numbers. Take a look at Miami-Dade County in comparison to the Florida numbers.
Yeah, I'm sure we could get the raw data for the county. The struggle would be comparing. I don't know that we have it, compared to the 67 counties across the state, but I can certainly look into that and find out if that's something that we can.
Please? Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. So just to reiterate, some of the key messages that we want to start practicing and getting comfortable with. We are an economic powerhouse. We are vital to the economic success of the state and of the county. We provide tremendous impact in the quality of life for every resident who lives in Miami-Dade County in every way that you can imagine. Investing in nonprofits is important, whether it be an individual, whether it be a foundation, whether it be government funding. Investing definitely 100% includes dollars, but there's other ways that people can invest as well, investing their time, their talents into nonprofit organizations. And start thinking about, if someone says, all right, I'm in, I buy it 100%, what do I do next? That we have some answers to those questions. And that might look differently depending on who you're talking to, but starting to really think about, if someone said, all right, give me a next step, do I have that list ready to give them? And as Vicki pointed out, for your organization, that's great. That might be easy to answer. But if we think about as the sector as a whole, as we're representing the chamber and the impact that the sector has overall, what do those next steps look like? And that's part of what this group is going to help us decide too. What are those important next steps? What are we asking for? And how do we build the relationship in the meantime so that when the ask comes, just like with fundraising, people are ready and willing to hear it. So any questions on that? I see one question in the chat. Any other human trafficking agencies on the call today? Feel free to chat or unmute yourself. Tanya's waving her hand, I think.
Yeah, Tanya is. I was just going to say Tanya runs her own human trafficking agency. Yeah.
Great. Any questions about the messaging? The overview. And as Pat pointed out, of course, the report is on the chamber website. You can read all of it. I would advise it at some point, reading through it. But nobody wants to hear you recite that long report when you go and sit down with them. You might have 10 or 15 minutes in front of an elected official. So what are those key messages? What are our strengths? What are our challenges? How do they reach you if they have any questions or need follow-up? That's really the key thing here. Okay, great. So I'm going to just touch a little bit on the legalities of advocacy and lobbying. I know that's a big question that organizations have when they start getting into this work, if you are new to it. And then Vicki's going to talk a little bit about how to start preparing to do some of this advocacy and lobbying work. And that's where we'll stop today to work into our next steps there. So just for your reference, we'll share these slides afterwards, but if you get questions from other people in your organization, especially board members who think, why are we doing this work? Is that really allowed? How do we know if we're going to get ourselves in trouble? This is the information that's going to help you with that. When we think about advocacy, it has a very broad definition. An action that speaks in favor of, recommends, argues for a cause, supports, defends, or pleads on behalf of others. And you can see here a big list of all the types of activities that fall under advocacy. Lots of different things: voter engagement, coalition building, which we're going to talk a little bit about in just a little bit, technical advice, research, education, and lobbying. Lobbying is one part of this, but there are many, many, many ways to do advocacy work without getting into the specific lobbying. Both are allowed from nonprofits. Lobbying does have more restrictions on it than advocacy does. But if we're talking just about advocacy, you are going to be in a very safe zone for a very long period of time with a number of activities that you can do there. When we talk about lobbying, this is what we mean. It's communications that are intended to influence specific legislation by a legislative body. Right? So that narrows it down really specifically. When we talk about lobbying, it has to be about legislation and it has to be by a legislative body. So we're not talking about administrative branches or departments. We're not talking about the judicial branch. We're not talking about, educating about what nonprofits do or what we want to accomplish in the community. It has to be related to specific legislation by a legislative body. Two kinds of lobbying that are important to know about. One is direct lobbying, and that means that someone from your organization is communicating your position to a decision maker. Now, the language that they use here is members, and that is a little bit confusing sometimes for nonprofits because although the chamber has a membership, some of you might have memberships. You also may not, and that's okay. Members are people who are already associated with your organization. So your volunteers, your donors, people who are engaging with you on a regular basis, people who already get your newsletter, those are all considered members of your organization. And that's important because you can do a lot more direct lobbying than you can grassroots lobbying. So the more members we have, the better it is for us actually. So direct lobbying is me going to someone within my organization, you know, associated with my organization, and saying, this is our position. Feel free to communicate this out to people who make the decision, right? Or you're urging members to do that on your behalf. This can also include attempts to influence referendum or ballot initiatives. That is allowed. That's considered direct lobbying because the people that make the decisions in that case are the voting public. So anyone who can vote will make a decision on a referendum and a ballot initiative. So that falls under the direct lobbying world as well. The other type of lobbying is grassroots lobbying, and that's when we go to people who don't know of our organization already, who are not associated with us, and we say, can you please contact elected officials on our behalf? So that would be, you know, a broad media campaign or engaging people who don't already associate with us and asking them to get involved in some way. You can do less grassroots lobbying than you can direct lobbying. So as long as they're associated with your organization, you're staying, you know, very clearly kind of in that safe zone there.
So I just wanted to point out for you all that Miami-Dade County has the strictest lobbying ordinance. So those of you that are already lobbying someone in the county know that you must take the ethics course every 2 years, and you must register. And it does not matter if it's the president of your company, if it's the executive director, if it's a staff member, everyone must be registered. The only break nonprofits get is you don't have to pay the $490 annual lobbying fee if you are if you're an employee of the nonprofit. So I know some of you already are lobbying, but it's really important that you understand what the lobbying requirements are, because you think that all you're doing is representing your organization, but in Miami-Dade County, that's considered lobbying. So you don't want to get yourself into a position where someone turns you into the ethics committee because they bar you from lobbying, from ever talking again. So, you know, knowing what the rules are really important, because, you know, we think about direct lobbying and grassroots lobbying, and we think, well, only a lobbyist has to register. Someone you pay, like myself, for instance. If you pay me to lobby on your behalf, I absolutely am governed under different rules. But now in Miami-Dade County, your organization must register as well. So I just wanted to point that out, because some people have gotten really snagged on that little.
I have a question on that. I have gotten really snagged. Actually, a few years ago, I was sent to the ethics committee by Miami Beach because I didn't realize we were doing a program here in Miami Beach, and we went to the city itself for money. And nobody told us until it was almost, well, nobody told us that we needed to register as a lobbyist. Just not even, this was not advocating for legislation at all. We were just asking, we want to do an art show. We need, you know, X $1,000. And can you guys help us out here? Not from the Cultural Council, which is different, but just straight from the city. And but that wasn't the part. You have to be careful, because that wasn't the part that actually got me. I did get registered, everything was cool, and it was fine. But then the program didn't happen, so we didn't get the money, and we didn't try to renew the program next year. And so I got called in next year, the following year, for not re-registering, although I hadn't had a meeting with the city for 1.5 years. So,
yeah, because you have to withdraw. You see, there's a formal withdrawal process.
And they didn't tell me that either. So it was exciting. So yeah, I have noticed that definitely you have to be careful about this stuff. Fortunately, I was let off, and they have a nice community advocate that advocates for people who are improperly accused and everything like that. So it wasn't a big deal, but it was, I mean, it was annoying. It took hours of my time to figure out. But yeah, this was great information.
Well, and I'll tell you this, every municipality has different.
Yes.
So you really have to be careful where you are, who you're talking to. I bet you all would be really surprised that a pharmaceutical salesman who's trying to sell drugs to Jackson Health System is considered a lobbyist. And they also have to take the ethics course, and they also have to register. And they're not even talking about public policy. So it extends even to appropriations. It extends to, look at how crazy this is. In Miami-Dade County, if a commissioner calls your organization to talk to you about a program and you're not registered and you haven't taken the ethics course, you're in violation. So you did not have to precipitate the conversation. If someone in the county comes to you and you're not registered, you're in violation. So I tell everybody, because people want to argue with me, and I always say, listen, the best thing to do is just go through the ethics course and registered. It's always better to be safe than sorry. And Tanya has asked where to go registered. Tanya, if you go to Miami-Dade County lobbying, right? I mean, you just go into the lobbying. They've got a whole department on the lobbying activities and how you register to lobby, how you register to take the course, etc. So I would encourage, if none of you are, and if you're thinking about having a conversation with anyone, do it, because you'll be better off. And
I have a question.
Yes.
If you do this work in multiple cities, now, if you're going to the county, you got to register with the county. But if you do work in multiple cities across the county, you have to register with each county, right?
With each city.
With each city. Sorry, yeah, with
Yes,
each city.
yes.
And do they all have different ethics course, or is it just one and then you can?
No, Miami-Dade is, like, for instance, the city of Medley. I can tell you that because I had to register in Medley with a client. The city uses the same sort of ordinance as the county. So if you've taken the ethics course there, they accept it. So again,
Good.
You have to check every municipality's ordinance. It's the best
Yeah.
way to go about it. And I wanted to, before we go on, I wanted to welcome Nellie Hawk, who is here with us today. She's our Director of Membership Services. I know some of you have met her and have dealt with her, but she is really our lifeline to how to make more of your chamber membership and the benefits and any opportunities. So welcome Nellie to the group, and all of you who don't already know her, I would suggest you get to know her. She's been a real great resource. Thank you, Nellie.
Thank you. And James, I saw your other question about, are we going to have coordinated activities from this subcommittee? That is the plan, yes. Of course, your organization can always advocate for itself, following all the rules and guidelines and ethics that we're talking about. But the idea for this, initiative is to make sure that we're collectively working together. So that is going to be part of what we see hopefully over the next month or so. Okay, one more quick definition for me: legislation. What does that actually mean? So actions by a legislative body that can happen at the federal level, the state level, or the local level. And that means county or city, town, village, any of that kind of stuff. So it doesn't just happen in Tallahassee. It doesn't just happen in DC. If you're talking about legislation, that is considered by the federal government to be lobbying. And you can see there some of the things that includes. But hopefully that will help reassure anybody who might be questioning or a little bit nervous about getting into the advocacy and lobbying world, if it's not something you do already. All lobbying is advocacy, but not all advocacy is lobbying. So really keeping that distinction clear, really understanding when you're advocating and when you're lobbying, and making sure that when it comes to lobbying, you're tracking and falling within the legal limits, which are here. So if you are a public charity, which probably most of you are, a 501c3 public charity with the IRS, these are the things that you're allowed to do. Advocate, lobby freely is the quote that comes from the IRS within the specific limits that are set out. And if people really want to dig down into how and where and why, two pieces of legislation or description, I guess, give us that right. The 1976 lobby law, which came from Congress, and the 1990 IRS regulation, which comes from the IRS. Influencing legislation and ballot initiatives, the things that we cannot do as a public charity. And this is where the line gets a little bit gray when you're advocating on behalf of the chamber. 501c3 public charities cannot participate in any election or partisan activities, usually called electioneering. And if you receive any federal funds from the US government, you cannot spend those particular grant funds on any lobbying activities. You can still lobby, but you have to be very clear that your federal funds are designated for activities that do not fall into the lobbying category. So you do want to make sure you're tracking any lobbying activities and really keeping that separate. If I don't think we have any foundations on, do you have a question, Tanya?
Yes, I do. Because I've always had a mixed understanding of how this works. So can you give me an example of what it is to not participate in election or bipartisan activities? Because I feel like I see a lot of nonprofits doing things, surrounding, local officials and, so what are the lines there? Because I don't feel that everyone maybe is upholding to this.
Yes, that's a great question. So the line is that generally speaking, nonprofits are advocating for policies, not people. Now, many of our nonprofits have support from elected officials, either personally or they've helped them, with appropriations or programs or just supporting the work that they do. And so you'll see that they have events maybe where they recognize or thank elected officials, or they might come and, give a welcome at an event they're having, something like that. As long as that elected official is not actively running for office at that particular time, they're not campaigning, and the elected official is talking about the work of the nonprofit and not about their personal platform or their personal politics, then that's fine. It's also okay for people who work for nonprofit organizations to be involved in politics personally, right? So I, as an individual, Leah, can give campaign donations, I can volunteer my time on campaigns, but what I want to make sure I'm doing is not doing that on my work hours, from my work computer, with my work email, and that while I'm doing that work, I'm not saying I'm here, Leah from FNA, I'm saying I'm here, Leah, as the individual voter in Miami-Dade County. So you want to make sure that line stays very clear. So most of the time, when we're not in election season, most of the time interacting with your elected official is going to be fine, as long as you're focused on the policy or the mission work and not the person, not the individual person's politics that come along with it. During election season, sometimes those lines get a little blurry. Candidates are looking for opportunities to get their face out there, their name out there. Some of them might try to push the boundaries a little bit of how they want to be associated with your nonprofit. So you do want to be careful that you're not allowing that to happen. It's also fine for organizations to do voter registration activities or voter engagement activities, as long as that stays nonpartisan. So you can't do a Democrat voter registration drive, but you can do a voter registration drive that allows people to make their own decision about how they want to engage in the politics.
So Tanya, you'll be interested to know, for instance, that the junior leagues actually host campaign forums, but there you must invite all the candidates, right? So that doesn't make it partisan. So we're not just inviting Democrats to an event and just Republicans. We're inviting everyone who's running for judge, let's say, and everyone has equal time. This is how we get really good at this, right? But you have to be careful. I think Leah's absolutely right. You have to monitor these legislators or these elected officials or candidates, because they don't want to. They're not. Their job is not to worry about us, keeping us safe within our own rules, because you can lose your 501c3 very quickly. And nowadays, with so many people turning so many people in for so many things, right? You have to be, I think, extra careful that you're always playing on the safe side. When in doubt, play safe. Don't do it, or ask someone, should I do it? Shouldn't we do it? How should we do it? A lot of nonprofits have moved to doing Advocacy Week, right? Where they have lots of, activities surrounding their particular issue, which might be, people coming to talk about it, organizations coming to talk about it, again, like Leah said, elected officials coming to talk about the issue, right? Your issues, or the organization's issues. So it gets dicey, so it's something to be careful about. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely.
Thanks for the clarification. That was good. It was something that I was very nervous about last year, to the point to where we didn't do a lot of stuff just because I didn't feel comfortable.
There is an election page on our website, flnonprofits.org, that gives a little bit more detail. While it might not apply right this second, 2022 is going to be a very big election year, not only at local level, but because of redistricting, every representative and senator at the state level will have to rerun for their seats. So it's going to be a busy 2022, and it's important to know that. But I will say it's slightly different for the chamber. So the chamber is a 501c6 organization, not a public charity. And so we are allowed as a chamber to endorse candidates. And you may see that sometimes happening. And this is where we have to be careful, I think, as nonprofit members, not to be actively engaged. You know, if your chamber membership is with your organization, I think you want to be careful in kind of keeping your distance from any chamber endorsements of candidates specifically, because that is something the chamber is allowed to do, but you don't want to appear to be using your nonprofit then to reinforce that endorsement in any way. So yeah, lots of fun kind of blurry lines that pop up during elections.
Real quickly, can you just maybe put the link to that page or repeat it so that I can kind of read up on it?
I will, absolutely. Okay, so we'll share these slides with you because we're getting close on time here, and I want Vicki to be able to talk about next steps. But this gives a little bit more description, what we are always allowed to do in the advocacy world, what are we never allowed to do in the electioneering world, and then what can we do on a limited basis as far as lobbying goes. So we'll share that with you. If you are really interested in getting into the lobbying world for your individual organization, you have questions about how you know your legal limits, please let me know. I'm happy to help answer some of those questions on an individual basis. But since these efforts are being done on behalf of the chamber, that would fall under the chamber's lobbying limits, and they'll be tracking that closely so that we don't have to worry so much about the detail there. It would only apply if you're doing this work on behalf of your organization. Okay, great. So I will turn it back over to Vicki.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to just briefly touch upon this because our next training is going to get really into the nitty gritty. But what are things you can be doing now to get prepared for these meetings that we hope to have in the near future? Can't stress enough what Leah said, which was read the economic impact report. There's nothing worse than being in a meeting where someone has a question and you have not done your homework, right? Your homework is to read the report, have a good understanding, and where you have questions to ask people like Pat or Leah or myself or anyone else at the chamber about that report, because inevitably people will know whether you know what you're talking about. And you see, we can do some role playing at some point about issues, and you will see how quickly you'll be able to tell who's actually in the room that knows what she's talking about and who is just sort of like tenuous and trying to read off of that 2-page paper that Pat talked about, you know, the information that we're going to have in a graph. You know, you really do have to sound like you know what you're doing. And if there's a question and you've read the report and you've studied the report, you're probably going to be better prepared to answer that question. Now, we don't have the answers to everything they ask. So always the best thing to do is to say, I don't have the answer now, but I will get back to you, because there's nothing worse than winging it and them finding out that you were wrong, right? So we always want to be accurate with the information that we're giving. So you want to learn about these elected officials. Look, they're all very different. You should be doing research on them. What are the issues that are important to them? There's a lot of press on these people. So you'll know what really drives them, right? So that you're going to get to know them. But more importantly, the most important person in that office is not the elected official. I know you may think that it is, but it's not. It is what I call the gatekeepers. And the first gatekeeper is the scheduler, the person who has the capacity to give you an appointment or not give you an appointment. I'm famous for saying that I am friends with everyone who works for the legislator, because that's who does the research. That's the person who I drop my things off with, who sits with that. Remember that his or her staff has the highest amount of access to that person. So we want to make sure that we know who they are, and you want to start figuring out whether you have any relationships. And I don't mean, do I know them? I mean, the way I measure whether you have a relationship with an elected official is, do you have their cell number? If you have their cell number, I know you know them, because they don't like to give it out to everybody. So, and I mean personal cell. So I want you to, make a list of all. We can probably provide you with the list of all the commissioners and all of our state. I have it, obviously, because I work with them every day, and our list of state legislators. And you should ask yourself, do I know any of these people? Because come the time when we start talking about who on this subcommittee knows somebody, you'll want to be able to say, look, I have a really good relationship with Chairman Diaz. I've got a pretty good relationship with Commissioner, Garcia, and I've got a really good relationship with the Lieutenant Governor, right? That's the kind of information that we'll need to know about, because you become very important to being present in that meeting, right? Because they have the relationship with you. We talked about being a resource and subject matter expert, and then we're going to engage in some coalition work, which should be hopefully the next slide. So coalition building, you guys do this all the time. So shouldn't be anything new. Here's what we're trying to do is figure out who in the community, who are those stakeholders that have a kind of have like a similar mission, similar interest that we could engage, because remember, the strength is in numbers. I like to say when I go as a member of the junior leagues of the state of Florida, we are 26 leagues that represent 22,000 women. That scares everybody, right? So that's why the numbers are large, because here's what they're doing. They're calculating number of voters in their head, right? Number of impact in the community. So you want to engage your base of support, right? All your volunteers, all your donors. But more importantly, you want to see who in the community. So for instance, we had a question today, is there anybody else on this committee that's in human trafficking? Well, so guess what? We learned that now Tanya can speak, can do some of that speaking. And so there was an immediate connect. Now, both of you that are in human trafficking obviously know others who are in human trafficking. So you might schedule a meeting and say, look, I want to inform you about this economic impact report that the chamber did. And we'd like you to join us, if you will, as we move forward. And we'll give you talking points and we'll help you, because the key here is that all coalition members must be saying the same message. The problem is when coalitions go off the reservation and they start saying different things. You see, the key here is that I want the legislator or the elected official to hear the same message over and over and over again. Because if you think that he's listening to you, the day that you've gone to see him, he's had 35 meetings. In 1 week, he's had 200 meetings. How do you distinguish yourself? For them listening to the same message from different people. So it's really important that we exchange information, skills, experience, and we do the same thing I'm doing with you now. Who do you know, right? Like Tanya may know people. Jackie may know people. So when you start doing coalition building, you start collecting data. So who's going to make that call, right? But we're all going to be talking off the same notes, right? The same messaging that Leah has said. Well, we're going to practice our message. We're going to make sure it's succinct and precise. And that's what we're going to give to everyone. So the next slide. Challenges. We've talked a little bit about the challenges already, but you're going to have some donor interference. Listen, some of your donors have really good relationships with these people, but they have them because they need those donors. They need those legislators for their own personal benefit, right? Their own personal businesses. So sometimes there may be some interference that they may want you to speak to a legislative or an elected official that really isn't a friend of our agenda. So that can get a little bit dicey too. How we deal with donors and with board members will be something that we'll talk about. But you really, people want you to compromise as well on your messaging. And at that point, that's when I say, well, you know what? We have to agree to disagree. This is the message that we're taking. We hope that you will continue to use that message in coalition with us. But if you find that you cannot, then you can go ahead and do what you're doing separately and apart from us. We'll understand, right? So you don't want to have people coming in, and trying to change the message, because that happens a great deal. Don't worry about, getting credit for your work. There's no room in the room for your ego. And I tell people this all the time. If you are really here for the work, then it doesn't matter who gets the credit. It doesn't matter who gets to talk to the legislator. Everyone's going to play a role, but everyone's role is important. So there's no one person that needs to get credit for everything. And then there's just some other ones there that you can look at and we can review when we get really, into more detail about, the next steps when we do the next training, because I know we're running out of time. So effective advocacy is a marathon, not a sprint. I cannot tell you how true that is. I want you to know that it took the junior leagues of the state of Florida. Your children are in booster seats. Thank you to the junior leagues of the state of Florida. It took us 15 years to pass that legislation. So it is truly a marathon, but it is worth every bit of the sweat and tears that goes into this work. And it's not work for the faint at heart, because this is you have to have tenacity, because they change all the time, and we are repeating our messaging Remember that legislators in the House are elected every 2 years, and in the Senate, they're elected every 4 years. I have been saying the same thing for over 30 years. I'm just telling it to someone new. But I'm tenacious, and and while they're looking for the bathroom, I've already made friends with all their new staffers, right? So you gotta know that there's a lot of nuances about this. And those of you that have heard my training, my advocacy training, know that it's not something that you can read about. It's something that you benefit from doing it. So here are some resources that Leah has provided for you. And of course, when you get the slides, you'll have them there. And if we go to the next slide.
And so if I can just talk about this one.
Sure,
really
sure.
So if you are from your organization level, this is a little different than, working as a part of the chamber committee, but from your organization level, if you're interested in trying a little bit of lobbying at the federal level, this is a great way to do it. We know that we have a new administration. The Biden administration is here. President Biden has put forth his American Rescue Plan. That's working its way through Congress. They hope to vote on that in the House next week to send it to the Senate to get it approved before unemployment benefits expire on March 14th. There are certain things that we are trying at the federal level to make sure are included in this legislation that will benefit all nonprofits. And you can see a list of some of those there. And so there's a sign-on letter right now that the National Council of Nonprofits is coordinating. I think we have over 3,100 nonprofits signed right now, about 103 from our state. If you are interested in helping to support this work, this is lobbying. We're looking to change existing legislation, but it's a nice kind of low risk way to get involved, find a little bit more about it. So we'll send out these links. You can read the existing letter, think about whether you want to sign on, and do so if that's something that is important to your organization. So just a way to kind of test it out a little bit, so to speak. All right, Vicki, so I'll turn it back over to you for next steps. We did have a question about whether this is going to be just economic impact or if we're going to have specific one-pagers on different issues, which I think that all relates back to the Chamber's advocacy agenda and what we're trying to accomplish as a organization.
Yeah, so I'll answer that question. So for this purposes, it'll just be the economic report. But if the committee has other issues that they think are very pressing, those should be, obviously voted on by your committee. And then it should also be forwarded to the Government Affairs Committee, which is where all policies, policy recommendations, if you will, or legislative recommendations are vetted, and then they're sent to the board of directors for approval, for the executive board first, and then to the board for those. But for this purposes only, it will be just the economic report that we're focusing on. So the materials are being finalized now. The training part 2 is going to be specific on lobbying, right? On advocating, both educating, lobbying, all the things that Leah went over. We're going to really dive into it, but we're going to dive into it with legislators in mind, right? So who are we going to go see, and how are we going to go see them? What are we going to say when we're there, and how are we going to follow up? That's all going to be part of the second training. And as you can see, that could take a good hour, because there's going to be different levels of government where we're going to want to, give this report to. So we will be developing what I consider to be a nuts and bolts advocacy 101, but I'm talking about real, nuances, right? It's going to include, what we know works and what doesn't work. So that's our plan. And then we'll certainly have an outreach plan created and shared with everyone about how we're going to, do this outreach and who's going to be involved. In the interim, if you do have, I will make sure that Tanya gets the list of local legislators in the county and our state legislative delegation. So if any of you have relationships with them, you can start to tell us, and we can start collecting that data. So that's our next steps. So let's see if there's any other questions that didn't get answered. People have to jump off, so we totally understand we've been over a little bit, and we apologize for that, because I know we like to keep it. Here is our contact information. If you need to reach Pat, myself, or Leah, please feel free to do so. So Tanya, yes, read the report now. Read the report, get ready. Start thinking about coalition members that you already work with. Start making a list of those that you would want to reach out to. If you know that they are already part of, whatever you're reading, because that's why I say first read, and then you'll know who to reach out to in your coalition building exercise. And Stephanie has put the report link right into the chat. So that's all for now. I want to thank Leah. Leah, you've done a great job. She's the one who developed this incredible PowerPoint, has worked very hard to ensure that we had the basis for the next steps. And I want to thank Pat, who couldn't be with us, but who really, was responsible for bringing us all together, and Stephanie for her support of the Nonprofit Business Sector Committee. Thank you so much. And for all of you who've joined us today, we so greatly appreciate your interest in this, and hopefully you'll be able to get more members of your organization for the second training, and let your other members of the committee know how you experienced this, and get them to get involved as well. So we thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And I just want to thank Vicki and Leah again for leading today's session. Thank you so much. We're looking forward to part 2. And for those of you asking, we will share today's PowerPoint along with the next date for the session, which should be in about a couple weeks or so. So be on the lookout for an email from me and Pat. And also we will be uploading today's recording to our Chamber's YouTube account. So be on the lookout for that link as well. We will send you all that information shortly. But again, thank you for participating, and a special thank you to Vicki and Leah for leading today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. You all have a great day.
You as well.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.
Stuff.